Good day everyone, I'm Jude Bathan of PSC 1-8, and today I'm going to discuss the assigned topic for me, which is the victim precipitation theory and incapacitation theory. But first, let's have a brief discussion about what victimology is. What is victimology? Victimology is the study of the relationships between victims and perpetrators when crimes are committed. Victimology is considered as a subfield of criminology. To understand this concept, first, we must understand the terms victim and perpetrator mean. The victim is a person who has been harmed by a perpetrator. The perpetrator, also known as the offender, is an individual who has committed a crime against the victim. Law enforcement agencies use the study of victimology and the theories of victimology to determine why the victim was targeted by the offender. The term victimology was first introduced by Benjamin Mendelssohn in the 1940s. Mendelssohn was a lawyer from Bucharest, Romania, who developed a scientific method for the study of the criminal act that utilized biopsychosocial data on the criminal, the victim, and the witness. He is also considered as the father of victimology. Now, let's move on to our first main topic, which is the victim precipitation theory. Victim precipitation is a criminology theory that analyzes how a victim's interaction with an offender may contribute to the crime being committed. Like all criminology theories, victim precipitation relates to how and why crime happens. While most theories focus on the acts and intentions of the offender, victim precipitation seeks to understand the interaction between the victim and the offender. Under this theory, the victim is viewed an active participant in the crime. This happens in two ways. First, the victim is the participant in the crime, who acts first, and second, the victim encourages or provokes the offender to commit the crime. These are the primary components of the victim precipitation theory. This theory is most commonly associated with crimes like homicide, rape, assault, and robbery. Let's move on to the brief history of victim precipitation theory. The phrase victim precipitation was first introduced by 20th century criminologist Marvin Wolfgang in his article entitled Victim Precipitated Criminal Homicide in 1957. In this theory, Wolfgang describes the victim as the first in the homicide drama to use physical force against the subsequent slayer. In those instances in which the victim was the direct positive precipitator, Wolfgang labeled the incident as victim precipitated. There are two types of victim precipitation. First is the active precipitation. Active precipitation occurs when the victim deliberately acts in a provocative manner, uses abusive words or threats, or even attacks first. For example, in the scenario of homicide, there are two guys who are having an argument for something, and guy A got pissed, so he posed a punching stance like he will going to punch the guy B. So guy B was threatened by the action of guy A, so he will also defend himself. The guy B pulls a knife and stabs guy A to death as the two wrestle on the floor that ended to a homicide. Another example is just like the first example, there are two guys who are having an argument for something, and guy A was using abusive words against guy B. Guy B got pissed off, so it led to an assault. The second type of victim precipitation theory is the passive precipitation. Passive precipitation occurs when a victim exhibits some personal characteristics that unknowingly threatens or encourages the offender. One example of passive precipitation is the racism. Nowadays, there is so much cases of Asian hate in the United States. Some Asian is being this victim of assault, robbery, and other Asian hate cases that involves violence against Asian immigrants. Another example of passive precipitation is when a coworker is being jealous because his office mate got promoted because he excelled on his job. There is a tendency that the office mate is unknowingly encourages the offender to commit a crime because of his jealousy. Another example is when a lady provokes the perpetrators by wearing too much revealing clothes. In the offender's perspective, it is a sexual provocation by the victim, and this can lead the perpetrators to commit sexual assault or rape to the lady. Now, let's move on to the three facets of victim precipitation theory. The first facet is the victim contribution. It refers to a person's action or lack of action that makes their victimization more likely. It is when victims contributed to their victimization through facilitation and precipitation, by gaining a reputation for vulnerability and by increasing the aggressor's sense of impunity. The second facet is the victim proneness. This implies that some individuals or groups have a quality that makes more likely to become victims of crimes. This can also refer to the fact that some victims are easy targets. It is one of the examples of racism and gender proneness, especially the ladies are more likely to become victim of crime. The third facet is the victim provocation. It suggests that the victim is the primary cause of his or her victimization. It occurs when a person cites another person to commit an illegal act. It is also a form of victim blaming. It is just like my example earlier about the provocation of the victim that led to a homicide. The concept of victim precipitation has been criticized for insinuating that the victim was somehow responsible for his or her own victimization. This generally referred to as victim blaming. Because of such criticism, it is important to differentiate victim precipitation, which is a behavioral concept, from provocation, which is a legal notion. Provocation is a legal concept used by criminal courts to determine and measure the offender culpability. In contrast, victim precipitation is a behavioral concept used by social scientists to determine the causes of victimization. The criterion for establishing provocation from a legal stance is the behavior of the offender, particularly the mindset of the offender and his or her level of self-restraint. Victim precipitation, in contrast, focuses on the behavior of the victim without accusations of fault or guilt. Now, let's move on to our last main topic, which is the incapacitation theory. Incapacitation refers to the restriction of an individual's freedoms and liberties that they would normally have in society. Proponents of the incapacitation theory of punishment advocate the offender should be prevented from committing further crimes either by their temporary or permanent removal from society or by some other method that restricts their physical ability to reoffend in some other way. Within the criminal justice system, incapacitation is the response used when a person has committed a crime by incapacitating the convicted offender. We prevent the individual from committing future crimes because he is removed from the society and locked up or restrained somehow. Incapacitation theory is a reductivist. It can be noted that incapacitation takes a forward-looking perspective in that it cannot rectify crimes that have already been committed, and only attempts to prevent crimes from being committed in the future. Reductivism is underpinned by the theory of moral reasoning known as utilitarianism, which maintains that an act is defensible and reasonable if its overall consequences are beneficial to the greatest number of people. The overall aim of the incapacitation theory is to prevent the most dangerous or prolific offenders from reoffending in the community. The four goals of incapacitation theory. Incapacitation is also considered as being one of the four goals of incarceration or imprisonment. Incapacitations come first, and then comes deterrence and rehabilitation, And finally, the retribution. Application of incapacitation. Most commonly, the term incapacitation is reserved for individuals who are sent to prison or given the death penalty. However, it also includes things like being supervised by departments within the community, such as probation and parole. Day reporting centers and ankle bracelets with GPS tracking devices may also be incorporated to incapacitate an individual. In some societies, incapacitation does not directly equate to imprisonment. It may involve corporal punishment or dismemberment. Western societies such as the United States and much of Europe, as well as a number of East Asian nations, do not employ these tactics. However, chemical castration, which includes court-ordered injection of a hormone that prevents the male offender from being able to perform sexually and may include minor surgery as well, has been used for incapacitate some sex offenders in both United States and Europe. Strategy of punishment. The most severe and permanent form of incapacitation is capital punishment. Capital punishment is often justified through the concept of deterrence, but whether the death sentence is actually deters potential offenders is highly contested. What is indisputable is that once put to death, an individual is incapable of committing further offenses. Capital punishment is therefore undeniably effective in terms of its incapacitative function. Method of incapacitation. The primary method of incapacitation is imprisonment. As with the capital punishment, incapacitation in the form of imprisonment is considered to be a strategy that works because for the duration of their prison sentence, offenders are restricted from committing crimes within the community. So, according to this theory, punishment is not concerned with the nature of the offender, as is the case with rehabilitation, or with the nature of the offense, as is the case with retribution. Rather, punishment is justified by the risk individuals are believed to pose to society in the future. As a result, individuals can be punished for hypothetical crimes. In other words, they can be incarcerated not for crimes they have actually committed, but for crimes it is anticipated or assumed they will commit. Again, the overall objective of the incapacitation theory is to keep the most dangerous or prolific offenders from re-offending in the society. And this ends my presentation about victim precipitation theory and incapacitation theory. Thank you for listening.